welcome to episode 149 of the Actual Astronomy Podcast. I'm Chris, and joining me is Shane. We are amateur astronomers who love looking up at the night sky, and this podcast is for anyone else who likes going out under the stars. How was your week, Shane? I'm pretty excited to hear about the 50FL if it arrived, and if you were able to get a look through it.
Yeah. So it did arrive, and I, the strangely enough, with the new purchase, the weather actually cooperated, and there was not clouds, there was not smoke. We had some decent conditions last night actually to observe. So where to start? So anyway, received the Borg 50FL, and it was like, if you do an internet search on that telescope, it comes with a few different pieces, like a helical focuser and then a couple tube sections. So it came with all of that. It came with the ring to mount it. I just had to add a dovetail. And to my surprise, when I unscrewed some of the there's sort of a longer tube section and then a shorter tube section. When I took the shorter tube off, there was a stack of camera filters that were screwed into the tube, which I didn't even know you could do, which is kind of anecdotal to this. But there's a bunch of sort of lens protector filters. Like there's a Nikon L1BC. There's a couple of 1B skylights. There's a weird. Yeah, I don't even know what this one's for. This one is a AC close-up number 4. I should probably just do an internet search to see what that even means, because I'm not a photographer, so the photography filters that are available, I'm not too familiar with them. From my basic understanding of what is in this stack, it really is just a bunch of things to protect the lens. Although these skylights are apparently a real soft magenta, so I'm not sure if they would have astronomical purposes or not. But
it'd be good for looking at Mars or something with.
Yeah. It's hard to detect the magenta. Like when I look through it, it doesn't really seem to change the color of anything. But maybe with with an astronomical object, maybe I would start to see something there. Oh, you know what? Actually, I am lying. This so I've got it in my hands, and I honestly haven't played with these filters. 4 of these filter rings don't have any glass in them. The only thing that has glass is this close-up filter.
Oh, well, yeah. So they're using them as spacers then, right?
Yeah,
because you can do that. Well, that's actually handy. That's in fact handier than having the glass in them. And I mean, they can come in handy. Like I might be able to use one of those, because I think one of my filter rings is broken on one of my 2-inch filters. Would they be the same size? Right? They're probably larger, aren't they?
Yeah, I think they're larger. They're 52 millimeter, and I think 2 inches 48. Yeah,
there goes that.
Yeah. So,
oh well.
Yeah, but I guess I can use photography filters in the Borg. Who knew? I didn't know that they had threads inside for that. So kind of interesting.
Wow. Well, yeah, that's pretty cool. I mean, this, although it's a 50 millimeter telescope, I think this is the telescope. This is one of the most exciting telescopes I think that you've purchased. At least I think it's right up there with as exciting as the 76 Takahashi. But this is just such a, I think it's probably the best, most portable, most configurable telescope that you can buy, and they're not really expensive too, which just kind of adds to their cachet, in my opinion.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, it's a 50 millimeter aperture, 400 millimeter focal length. So it's an f8. It's a little slower. So it's not going to provide the ultra wide fields that our mini Borgs provide, but it's a fluorite lens.
Yet.
Yeah, I guess if I get that reducer thing, that's well down the road if that ever happens.
Yeah.
So last night, the conditions weren't too bad. Like I was saying, it cleared up. We did have rain yesterday, but it cleared up. Transparency seemed pretty decent, although, there was a lot of humidity here. Like the dew was just setting in like crazy. And I took some looks at Saturn as well as Jupiter with the little 50 mil. What I was running, let me just do the math here. I was using a 5mm eyepiece, so 400. What would that be? About 80 times? Yeah, 80 times magnification. And Saturn was just beautiful. Very crisp, very clear. Easily separated the rings from the planetary disk, which on smaller apertures that can be sometimes challenging. I wasn't able to get the Cassini division last night. I'm not sure if that is necessarily a limitation of the aperture. Conditions weren't perfect, so I would like to see it maybe under just a bit better night to see if I could get the Cassini. But it looked great. I was able to see a couple of the moons. I'd have to look at my planetarium software. I think Titan for sure, and maybe Rhea, but I'm not 100% on that. And that was pretty cool. I wasn't able to see any of the cloud banding on Saturn, like the subtle differences in hues, but it was a beautiful view. So then after that, I moved to Jupiter because at this point, Jupiter kind of reached its high point in the sky. And, the Galilean moons, of course, were no problem. But I was really quite astonished with what I could see on Jupiter with a little 50mm telescope. It really, really shocked me. Obviously the equatorial bands were no problem, but they weren't. I was able to see some of the definition there. Again, that jaggedness, that unevenness that those cloud bands, show was apparent in the 50 mil. The color variations, the shading of it was also quite visible. I was able to see both polar regions. It was a distinct cut there, where the polar region began and when it transitioned into the next temperate belt or whatever it is. So and unevenness within the polar regions, it was kind of neat. I wasn't sure what I would see for planetary detail with a 50mm telescope, but holy smokes, it can show you an awful lot.
Yeah, well, you're not looking through as much atmosphere, right? So, I mean, you have that advantage for sure.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's a great little performer, man. That little telescope is unbelievably light. It barely weighs anything, which is sort of a trademark of the Borg telescopes. Is not only are the optics of good quality, but it's tough to find a lighter telescope than a Borg, depending, I suppose, on your configuration. But they're very light, and balance was quite easy. I had no issues there. The only thing that I'll have to play around with a little bit is I put on it came with the helical focuser that you put on your mini Borg, Chris, and that I have on my mini Borg. It's the 7860. It's kind of a bigger focuser. It can handle a 2-inch eyepiece or 2-inch diagonal. But I have a smaller helical focuser by Borg, and it mates with T2 components. And it's smaller, it's just lighter. So I put that thing on, and the travel is a little bit less. And I was having a few issues, like my panoptic, my 24mm panoptic, I couldn't get to focus. But any of my 0.965 stuff worked. So my orthos, my 40mm Pentax Kellner, that worked. So I'll have to play around a little bit with my configuration just to ensure that I can get focus with everything. But once I get that kind of figured out, I think that this is going to be an amazing travel telescope, and the ultra kind of lightweight grab and go. You there, Chris?
I'm there. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Thanks. Yeah, I am very remote here, people. So I'm sure it's fine. I think we just hit a gap there for a few seconds. And Shane and I have a small delay, so it probably seemed like an eternity for Shane that I had left him again. So all right. Well, that's really exciting. So what mount did you use?
I put it on my Berleback Castor 2 mount, that little T mount that weighs a couple of pounds. So I've been loving that mount as well. I've I've been running that exclusively since I got it. It's mostly carried my 76 millimeter tack, but I took the tack off, put the little 50FL on last night, and it was beautiful. Hand track. So I was using the super monocentrics last night too, which means 30-degree field of view. And, at 80 times, there wasn't a lot of sky that I was seeing, but manually tracking the planets was no problem at all. No vibration. It was really nice.
And I have to ask, did you try the 31 Nagler on
it? No, I didn't last night. I really just had it set up for 4.25 inch. I'll try the 2-inch stuff at some point just to see how I can achieve focus. The issues with using the 2-inch stuff, especially like the Nagler, with such a small telescope is the balance issues. So I guess I'd probably have to get my little counterweight balance system out and use that. But yeah, I'll give it a try at some point.
Yeah, well, that's really exciting. Yeah, that was a scope that I was looking to get before I made another purchase, and yeah, it's such a cool scope in my opinion. Like for me, I know you're not really considering getting the focal reducer too much, but that was actually my plan is that I would get this telescope and get the focal reducer and maybe sell my TAC 60 to fund it all, because the whole purpose of the TAC 60 is to have as wide a field in like a regular telescope configuration as I can get, as well as to have like a super portable instrument. And the 50FL is more portable. And with the focal reducer, you get even a significantly wider field than the 7.5 degrees I get with my TAC 60. But yeah, I think you get pretty much 10 or 9.8 degrees or something. I get a couple more degrees out of the 50. And yeah, sometimes it's not about having any more aperture. This would be a decrease in aperture, but I just think that the 50FL just must be phenomenal, considering how good the little 50s have been. But I'm keeping my little 50. I just love it. It rides on my TAC 100 millimeter beautifully. So it's staying.
Yeah. The little Borg mini 50s are amazing, and I think they're the ultimate versatile telescope. You can use it as that ultra wide field. You can use it as a finder scope, mounted on the back of something else. It's a fun little telescope. The FL that I just got definitely means my Zeiss 50 millimeter by 540 focal length that will be posted for sale here very soon. And potentially, I'm not saying no to that reducer. I may end up getting that at some point. It's more just finding one, I guess, and then deciding if I want to spend the money on it. But potentially my William Optics 61 millimeter Zenith Star. I bought that around the same time that you bought your 60 millimeter TAC. And basically for the same reasons that you bought it. I'd always wanted a 60 millimeter because they are an excellent travel telescope. They're quite small. It's pretty easy to put a 2-inch eyepiece in. It comes with a 2-inch focuser and provides some really, really wide field views. And the views through that William Optic are amazing. But it is, comparatively to the Borg, if you want to talk about the ultimate travel telescope, the William Optics is not heavy, but compared to the Borg, it's a boat anchor. It's quite a few more pounds. Yeah. And that's not hard to travel with. Where adding that weight becomes a bit of an issue with travel is you just need beefier tripods and beefier mounts. So it's sort of like the domino effect. And if you can go with a super light telescope, then all of your other gear can be super light, which helps with weight restrictions and such when you're traveling. So the William Optic may be another casualty here too as a result of this purchase, but that one I'll wait for a little while before I make that decision.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I do love my TAC 60. It is just such a perfect grab and go and wide field instrument that really does show the planets beautifully as well. So, but yeah, that Borg 50. After I tried the mini Borg 50 Achromat, I thought, yeah, that really is the ultimate scope. But it's f8, so for me, I was kind of well, it doesn't meet that ultra wide field requirement. But then as I as I said back in late spring, I discovered that you can modify it. And considering that the cost of the components used, you can only really get them used now. It's not bad. It's definitely not as expensive as a TAC 60. And it has, I don't know if you mentioned this in the last episode, but the Borg 50FL, I think, is basically a redo of the TAC 50C or something like that.
FC 50, I think it was.
Yeah, that sounds right. Yeah. So it's a remake of a TAC Classic, but in a more portable and more configurable setup. So, gee, I mean, that's really hard to argue against. Affordable, used, portable, configurable to a few different configurations: planetary, wide field, and photography. So, that's really awesome, if you ask me.
Well, and also configurable to 2-inch, right? The TAC FC 50. I don't even know. Is it 1.25 inch? Yeah, I think it probably came out as 0.965, but you know the TAC stuff you could adapt it up. So But I don't think you can mod the FC 50 for 2-inch.
No, I think maybe you could or whatever, but you'd always be battling against the the very strict tube configuration, so you might have trouble reaching focus.
Right. Yeah.
Even if you could get the sizing right, like the focal range might not work well. Whereas with the Borgs, you can need a different focal point, then no problem. Just get some old neutral density filter rings and take your filters out, and there you go, like a big stack of spacers.
Yeah. In its current f8 configuration, the 24 millimeter Panoptic provides a 4-degree field of view, and the Nagler 31 millimeter is about 6.4 degrees. So, even 6.4 degrees isn't that bad. It's certainly not ultra wide field, but boy, there's not many telescopes that will show a nice 6-degree field.
Yeah, and if you get that focal reducer, it takes you down to 280 millimeter focal length. But the big but with this is, and I guess the downside is the focal reducer even used is going to be into the hundreds of dollars Canadian. But they are readily available. They're not as good as the newer focal reducers for imaging, so they're perfect for visual. So people do tend to sell them at a good discount. And then with that, you're getting a true flat field versus with the mini Borg, which is 250 millimeter focal length in its native configuration. You're going to have significant field curvature, but with this focal reducer on the 50FL, you're going to have a flat field, and a flat field at 280 millimeter focal length is going to. That's going to wake the floor of the mini Borg flat field capability. It's just going to be totally flat. So imagine having that almost same field of view as the mini Borg, but totally flat and with fluorite lens elements. Basically, that would just be like looking at like a wide field photograph of the night sky in real time. That's pretty ridiculous. And the cool part about this is, even though you kind of have to futz and cobble together the parts, to me it's a good mix of sort of telescope building, understanding telescopes, and saving some money kind of all into one, because again, these are basically Takahashi quality instruments for not a whole lot of money, really. You would spend what you would spend on getting a good new run of the mill telescope, what we're spending on these. So it's a little bit of futzing around, but it's kind of fun. And then you're getting something that gives you a unique field of view and high power capabilities in small instruments. Very neat.
Yeah, absolutely. And I kind of lucked out too. Whoever the previous owner was, they really cared for this thing. It is in really, really nice condition. But in addition to that, every piece of the internal, I guess, tubing has been perfectly flocked, including like that little helical focuser. There's
wow.
There's like a 1-inch sort of, length of tube in there. Even that's flocked. So, that really tells me that whoever owned this was trying to get like peak performance out of this little telescope. When you start covering off small details like that, you're trying to make it as good as it possibly can.
Well, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah,
that's cool. Very cool.
Yeah, so I'm excited to keep using this little guy and see what it can do, especially under a dark sky. I want to see what it does with some of the open clusters and brighter nebula. I'm under no illusion it is still 50 millimeters, but it's a fun little telescope to play around with.
Yeah, well, maybe think about Tuesday night coming out. I'm thinking I'm going to go home today and then come back on Tuesday. It's supposed to be pretty warm, and the day might be unstable, but we'll just have to keep watching the sky. If you're up for that, that could be a good night to take a run out here and start using this as like a regular kind of site. I think there's even a couple beverages in the fridge. So
whoa, now you got my attention.
if it is cloudy, so yeah. That'd
cool.
be good
for sure. And you got some new stuff that I think you were able to use and a little observing last night as well.
Yeah, I got the Telegizmo's 365 cover. It's not really this. None of my stuff is very exciting at all. It's more practical, I guess, than buying yet another small telescope, which I'm not knocking at all because I really, really am excited to look through the Borg 50FL. But one thing that has always kind of dogged me is, and it was great because last night was the first clear night or the first clear-ish night that we were going to have since I got the Telegizmo cover. So the Telegizmo 365 cover is basically a barbecue cover for your telescope. I think that's probably the best way to describe it, isn't it? It's like canvas with a lined interior.
That is perfect. And I never thought of that description, but that is 100% accurate.
So if you're wondering what this thing is, it's a barbecue cover for your telescope, but it's designed for telescopes. It's got a sort of a whitish beige exterior, and it has a silver lining that's supposed to be some sort of custom material, but it kind of looks like the stuff you put in your car windshield for hot days. But they're designed to cover telescopes apparently outside 365 days of the year. And some people do that, which isn't really my intent exactly. But what my purpose for this piece of equipment is that just like yesterday, we were having these rain showers that were coming through, and at times torrential rain. Like I actually wasn't going to observe. And then I was sitting around thinking, I think I do want to observe. So I took an extra run into the city and picked up a carload of my gear, like tripods and chairs and my like way more equipment than I ever would take observing with us if we were going to a dark site. And then I got out here and my wife was like, where are you putting all this stuff? And I'm like, I have an 8x14 shed now. It's going in that. So started filling the shed up and threw a tripod up on the hill with my 100 millimeter tack and kind of starting to get my stuff a little bit organized. But what I was able to do is set up the tripod and my mount, and I threw the cover. I'm like, because it was raining in places around here, and I took a photo. I think I sent you the photo of the tripod with the mount and the 365 cover, and you can actually see pretty heavy rainstorms are all around it. You can tweet that out if you want. If people might be interested to see that.
Yeah, for sure.
And so then what I did is once these storms had passed, I checked the radar, and there was actually still some chance of some of these showers, very light showers. But there was probably a 20 or 30% chance that we would get one about halfway through my observing between around 10 or so and 11 was going to be we were going to have one of these come over us. And so I was like, well, this is what I'm doing out here. And so I put the telescope up, and my wife and I observed the planets at dusk. We took a look at Venus and Jupiter and Saturn, and then And then it got dark, and I came out and I looked at M101 just above. Anyway, the big galaxy is just above the handle of the Big Dipper, and I looked at the double cluster and Kemble's Cascade and NGC 1502, and looked at a bunch of other open clusters and nebulae down in the summer Milky Way. Like, it wasn't like an amazing night, but it was still plenty dark, and I knew I was working with maybe an hour of darkness before that moon comes up. So I looked at the lagoon, and I looked at a bunch of different stuff, and then this cloud that was forecast started to encroach, and so I'm going to throw this cover over my Takahashi telescope and hope for the best here. And so I threw that up and came inside for the hour that was set to pass, and we never did get any rain. But if I'd known that cloud was coming in the past, I likely would never have set up. Because where I'm setting up, probably I wouldn't be able to get the telescope in time. I'm about 30 feet away from my storage shed, and you can get pretty wet in the downpours that we were having yesterday if you had to carry something more than about 4 feet. So and then an hour later it had moved off and the moon started rising. So I went up, I tore the cover off and looked at Saturn, Jupiter, and the moon for the better part of an hour. And then it was pretty late by that point. I think it was midnight or past midnight or whatever. And so what I did is I just pulled it on and put an extra strap around it and walked in and went to bed, and then get up this morning and, everything was still there. I mean, it's a pretty difficult spot for anybody ever to get to without, basically just coming through my living room. So, it's a fairly secure spot there. But I was pretty happy to actually be able to get a night in observing. I got 3 hours in, I think, or close to it. And this basically would never have been a session that I ever would have driven anywhere for, but was able to get some really decent observing in. It was a lot of fun.
That's really good to hear. The convenience of being able to do it kind of in the backyard really helps a lot. And then, like you mentioned, having the kind of the peace of mind or the insurance policy of that telegizmo cover in case the clouds did drop some moisture. That's really good. I imagine that will enable you to just get more and more observing in.
Yeah. And, it's pretty exciting because, these covers, they're not that expensive. I had the receipt there. I think it was like $159. So we're not talking about this huge outlay of money. And it basically gets you almost halfway to having an observatory because, you're able to set the gear up and then leave it out. For example, there was part of me that was debating, well, I could stay out here tonight and then just drive into work tomorrow because it's not that far to work from here. But I'm probably not going to do that. But if I was I would just leave the telescope set up on the hill all day and covered over just like it is now, and then observe tonight, and then get up early tomorrow, maybe take it down or leave it up for a couple days. It's no problem. I mean, there's all kinds of other stuff that's around up here that that this is the last thing anybody's gonna walk where they would have to climb a cliff, and it wouldn't be very easy to get to it. So, but it's really cool to have that capability to just have that sitting up there and just be able to go and use it without having to do a full teardown and set up every time I want to go up. In the future, maybe I'll get a little roll off or something, but I kind of want to test out the different spots here, and I don't want to do anything too quick. And there's still a few modifications to the building here that I want to make. One thing we had done is put in some insulation. It wasn't really fully insulated, so coming out here, if the temperature was cool at all, just wasn't going to be possible. So that's much better now. We have another thing I need to do. So there's other things I want to do before before I go that route, one other thing I tested out last night was the Teleview 3x Barlow.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have it set properly because I for some reason, in all the gear that I grabbed, I didn't grab an extra 1.25 inch adapter. I only grabbed the one I use as a plug and a backup adapter, and it has a big stop in it. And so it was sitting up really high in the adapter. It only seats down about an inch. And I think that was causing a challenge to the performance. But I always wanted to do this. I wanted to get a 3x Barlow so that I could Barlow my Doctor 12.5 millimeter. And so that's what I did. So I did a lot of observing. I think I was probably getting about pretty close to 200 power, which is about maximum power for a 100 millimeter telescope. And did some observing of Saturn and Jupiter for quite some time. And I was able to see some pretty significant banding on the planet of Saturn on the disk. And then I was able to see 2 or 3 different tonal differences on the rings. I can't remember which is which, but one of the rings was more of a reddish color and one of the rings was much paler. And I could see the Cassini division all the way around. The seeing conditions weren't very good at all. Things were kind of swimming a little bit, but the sky transparency was really good. And then over on Jupiter, I could really see quite a ton of detail at that power. Typically, I don't run that much power on Jupiter, but I could see like barges in the equatorial zone attached to, I can't remember which, the darker of the 2 bands had like these barges attached to it. I think you mentioned them. You were observing them with your 76.
Yeah. I think that's in the northern band because I think the northern band is a little darker right now.
Yeah, I think you're right. And so, I could see these 2 barges like very, very clearly. And the wealth of detail was phenomenal. Especially, I think probably the best way to put it is that was the most detail I've seen on those 2 planets when seeing conditions haven't been very good. Like they were kind of like swimming a bit, like you could really see the atmosphere. Like we had these storms kind of skirting around, and the sky was just unstable yesterday, and that did continue even though the clouds went away at night. The air is just a bit wavy, and you could see it even in the clouds. Like as some of them went away, you could see like how the air was cutting through the clouds, and I think the same kind of air pattern held up during the night as well, unfortunately, but it did clear off. And that was a really neat combination to run that Teleview 3x Barlow and the 12.5 millimeter Doctor, because it's very easy. That's a very easy eyepiece to look through. But I'm hoping it was just the fact that I had it sitting out too far, because I was getting like, there was every once in a while I would get like almost like, I don't know if it's an internal reflection or what. I think it really was just like an internal reflection. And I think it might have been from the fact that Barlow needs to sit pretty far into your focus. And I did, and I had it sitting way, way up and out, and it probably wasn't centered at all. So I'm thinking that, I was getting this bad internal reflection because of that. So kind of fingers crossed. I've never been a huge fan of Barlow's. But when it wasn't giving me the reflection, it was only like one spot. And if it wasn't giving me the reflection, then everything was fine. It was a pretty decent night considering this weekend looked like it was originally supposed to be a washout. We weren't supposed to do any observing in at all. It was forecast to be solid rain all day yesterday, but there was some rain showers around, but it wasn't a bad day. And then last night was, it was okay. We had hour of darkness and not too bad, not too shabby considering.
Yeah. The like you said, the original forecast wasn't looking good, but as we got closer and closer to Saturday, it looked like there was a little bit of potential, and it came through, which was really nice. One thing I want to mention before I forget, because I wanted to mention this last week when we recorded. We're talking a lot about observing Saturn and Jupiter right now, and there's 2 podcasts, one podcast, 2 episodes that people should listen to if they're observing Jupiter and Saturn. go to the Observer's Notebook podcast. It's put out by the Association of Lunar and Planetary Observers. The last two episodes that they've released are all about observing Jupiter and all about Saturn, and they're awesome. And the interesting thing about the Jupiter one that really stands out for me is they're very interested in people's observations, but of the changing brightness of surface features on Jupiter. Now, typically, photographers or that type of equipment is needed, but visual astronomers can still make some contributions to, I guess, the research that's taking place with that. And it was a good listen. I think each episode is about 30 minutes. And I highly recommend it if anybody's observing Jupiter and Saturn this year.
Yeah, I had been listening to it. And then when I started doing some other stuff this summer, I think that I reduced my podcast listening. So I'm going to have to hop back in and catch up on those episodes. That sounds really cool.
Yeah, for sure. I really enjoyed them.
Good stuff. Well, speaking of time and podcasts, I pretty much said my bit for today. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Shane.
No, that's everything. I'm hoping that we can keep observing, that we're kind of out of the smoke and out of the rain and have some good weather ahead, hopefully.
Yeah, fingers crossed. Well, thanks for joining me today, and thanks everybody for listening.
Thank you everyone for listening, and we hope you enjoyed the show. If you are interested in more information, would like to contact us, or if you would like to support the podcast, check out our website, actualastronomy.com.